The haters thought I was dead. Their worst fears I have made manifest. Another YouTube video. So hello, welcome back. We got a long winding road ahead of us today. So kick those feet up on the dash. Grab a 20-ounce Wawa coffee, or Tim Hortons, or Sheetz, or God forbid 7-Eleven, and enjoy the ride. As you may have noticed, there is an elephant in the room. His name is Reginald, and he is my personal advisor. The other elephant in the room, however, is that this is my first video about a game outside of the Souls and Souls-like genre. And to be honest, it's been some time coming. For all the Gen Alphas, Zs, and the hip Zillennials out there, allow me to put it this way. You see, From Software rizzed me up good with the Duskblood's strong aura, but making it an Ohio 2 exclusive broke their mewing streak, and I high-key got the ick. Chicken jockey. So, before Night Rain enters the lobby and completely mogs every other game in my catalog for the next minute or even two, where we drop in, I've been taking a little FromSoft vacation and letting Capcom cook, immersing myself into one of my other favorite games and communities, Monster Hunter. Now, if that whole bit wasn't enough to completely alienate any new viewers that are here for some regular old Monster Hunter content, welcome. You're gonna fit right in here. I am Big Charles. Thanks for stopping by the channel, and feel free to hit the YouTube buttons to see more of what I do here. Now, if I know anything about making a video on Monster Hunter, I know that it's quite important that I do the obligatory exposition dump on the experience I've had with the series, so I'll try and be brief. There are timestamps if you just want to skip past this, by the way. The long short of it is, I've been a casual but consistent Monster Hunter enjoyer since I first laid eyes on it on the used shelf in a GameStop a couple years after it came out. I've had at least a peripheral interest in Monster Hunter for about as long as I've had an interest in video games. I remember playing the first game on my PS2 and being completely transfixed. Transfixed by the, at the time, to me, strange premise, the immersive art style, and many systems vying for my attention. I never made it very far into that game, RPG inexperienced young lad that I was, but I'll never forget the incredibly dreamlike and surreal feeling that stumbling around that extremely lifelike early game content gave me. Since those days, the series has sort of lived on the blurry edge of my gaming attention, coming in and out of focus as new titles release. I remember I really liked Freedom Unite on the PSP, 4 Ultimate on the 3DS, and I always really wanted to play GU, but I just couldn't justify buying a Switch at the time. Sound familiar? However, I was never quite captured fully by these games. I think it was mostly an attention span thing on my end, to be honest. But, like many, it wasn't until 5th generation, when World and ultimately Iceborne came around, that I really fell in love with the series. Some of the surreal and obscure elements were lost to time and technical advancement, but taking their place were more fluid and lifelike animations, similarly immersive and somewhat modernized moment-to-moment gameplay, expanded hunter capabilities, and a beautiful world full of systems both familiar and new to explore and interact with that really captivated and excited me in a whole new way. Not to say I think World is necessarily better than the old gen titles. I don't think that. It just so happens to be the point at which I really got stuck in with the series. It's where it clicked, like a dance. All that is to say, I am paradoxically both an old head hunter and a 5th gen baby. I'm a veteran casual, a young unk, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So, with that out of the way, today I'm talking about the game that's most recently taken my leisure time by storm, and a game with the potential to make my GOAT list. That game, of course, is Monster Hunter Wilds. Now, of course, I'll be talking plenty about the game, but this isn't really intended as a comprehensive review or anything of that sort. My review is as follows. Game good, 8.5 out of 10. Buy it. No, my intention today is more so to discuss the primary controversial element surrounding the game in the community. That being the difficulty in Wilds and what certain design choices may or may not mean for the direction of the series. I'll be talking mostly through the lens of my own experience with the game and series, so keep in mind that my biases are my own. I'll try and stay aware of them. By the way, I'm just rolling some various gameplay from my hunts in between any relevant visuals, so try not to fixate on how terribly mid I am at the game. I am a casual after all. And one more note before we dive into the meat and potatoes. This video has been informed by plenty of other great content on the subject matter. I'm not here to say that my takes are completely novel or original, and I certainly don't want to give off the impression that I'm the most knowledgeable or involved hunter around. I'm really just making this out of a love for the game and a desire to do my part to fill the Monster Hunter content sphere with more constructive and thoughtful, positive content, and to toss my hat in the ring with the guys I look up to in this community and pushing back against the new game bad guys out there. I'll be linking a couple other great videos that inspired and informed me in the description, and at least at one point I'll be directly referencing them in this video. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get down to business. Difficulty. There's a new Monster Hunter game on the block. A 6th gen baby game for 6th gen baby people, right? Well, maybe, kind of. But also maybe not. There is a lot of discourse, as is tradition, on the difficulty of the newly released Monster Hunter, and how the game's design supposedly points somehow to a decline, a casualization of the series' direction. And again, as is tradition, a fair chunk of this discourse comes off as knee-jerk and lacking in nuance and perspective. If you can't tell by my tone, while I can relate to and understand this discourse and concern, I am very skeptical of it. Like I said, this happens every time, and it boils down to the fact that base game low and high rank missions are never all that hard, especially in new gen Monster Hunter. While this is a valid thing to see as problematic with new gen in its own right, I also think there's a good and deliberate reason for things to be this way, but we'll circle back to that. The reason this happens every time is that Monster Hunter fundamentally is a series that derives its longevity from its experimental variance from title to title. Each game introduces new gameplay concepts and gimmicks, leaves some behind or heavily modifies them, expands on the hunter's capabilities, and improves in quality of life, or at least attempts to. Coming from a potentially more restrictive prior entry where you've been facing the toughest endgame challenges for months or years straight, into a newly released game that offers you more combat options than ever, more ease of interaction, playing through the forgiving by design low rank quests and somehow expecting to feel challenged is just straight up unrealistic. Not to mention a little gatekeepy, but I'll expand on that in a second. You see, they've always been making Monster Hunter easier by some people's definition of the term. It's intentional and deliberate. The reason for this is pretty apparent and simple. The ways in which Monster Hunter achieved its reputation for difficulty in first and second gen was largely due to the friction the game emphasized on every action the player took, and even more so due to the genuinely unrefined and arguably bad character controls. Not that the controls were notably bad for the time, they were pretty forgivable for 2004. That being said, they just do not hold up to modern standards. The games need to evolve to stay relevant, both in controls and design. If making the character more intuitive and fluid to control is making the game easier, and if the ability to make item loadouts or any other number of quality of life improvements is making the game easier, then I don't really see a problem with reducing that sort of difficulty and replacing it with something more engaging, like combat. I don't see a problem with it because it's not in service of casualizing or changing the identity of the game. It's about being able to more fully realize the vision of the developers and make the game more enjoyable to experience for longer. Trust that I understand this is just my 2 cents, and as a certified Souls old head, I more than understand pining for a time long since past where my favorite game was really mean to me. And I genuinely think these changes have the game's best interest and longevity at heart. And I think certain elements of the Monhun community just act weird, needlessly incendiary and toxic about the series inevitably evolving to be different from whatever game they first fell in love with. If you're a die-hard old genner, I do get it. Those games did indeed ask more of the player and apply more friction to your journey. It took longer to take down monsters, they dropped less materials. If you started up a quest without properly preparing your items, tough luck, no restock. These elements of old gen are super cool, and core to Monster Hunter's old gen identity, but it's not the game we're talking about. World, Rise, Wilds, and whatever portable 6th gen we end up getting are all oranges to old gen's apples. While this is true, more intuitive movement, combat, less restrictive items, general ease of use and quality of life improvements, changes with the intention of generally making the game more convenient and enjoyable are a trend not only since the dawn of new gen, but even throughout the entire trajectory of old gen. This just goes to further illustrate the point that they've always been making it easier, and it has objectively made the games more fun and more accessible to more people. Quality of life is the direction of the future, and it isn't a bad thing to have games that are easier to pick up and play. Now, it's important to understand that the old idiom, "the hardest Monster Hunter is the first one you play," really does hold some serious water. Maybe more accurately, to avoid undue comparisons, it should be, "the hardest new-gen Monster Hunter is the first one you play." But that doesn't really roll off the tongue the same, eh? But listen, people remember World as harder than Rise or Wilds. Not because it is, but because that's when the majority of the modern player base joined up. We all were ass when we were playing through World low rank. Even many dedicated vets from the old gen were really bad at playing World because it was their first new-gen game, and thus it played drastically differently from any Monster Hunter they had experienced before, even with all the new quality of life and accessibility. Anjanath didn't triple cart you because Anjanath is hard. He triple carted you because you didn't know the game yet, and he did weirdly high damage on that one flamethrower move, and you didn't have good gear to bridge that knowledge and skill gap between where you were and where Anja expected you to be. I mean, I hate to break it to all the people who want low rank to challenge them, even though they've braved the hardest content of Iceborne with Fatalis, or Primordial Malzeno in Sunbreak, or GU Deviants or whatever, but it's just not gonna happen. This just isn't going to happen, man. And this brings me back to this whole difficulty gripe and how it can feel gatekeepy, even if not meant that way. You know, Monster Hunter is a game that's actually way harder to learn than it is to play. So if you really want them to make freaking low rank or even anything in base high rank just ball-bustingly difficult, you're being pretty inconsiderate of the whole onboarding process that those ranks represent. I mean, think about what new players, think about what they have to go to just to learn how to play one weapon and move around somewhat competently. Even in a game with the raised skill floor and easier to learn weapons like Wilds. Let alone figuring out build crafting, item management. I mean, I saw my buddy who's new to the series rack up 2 carts against Alala Barina, playing Gunlance. Man, and I'm not making fun of him, I'm making a point. There is just a lot of stuff in your mental stack when you're new to these games and you haven't internalized so much about the systems. I mean, you just end up taking that stuff for granted once you're no longer new. Remember getting walled, quote unquote, by Anja in World? Imagine if that was just freaking arch-tempered Teostra at that point in the game. You feel me? Or even Arkveld. Something that would be genuinely tough for veterans. You'd never, ever push through that challenge as a newcomer. I know that example's hyperbolic and no one in their right mind would want that. And I'm sure there's a couple guys saying, nah, I'd win. You probably wouldn't. But I'm not trying to strawman anyone or anything. I'm just illustrating my point to the logical extreme, okay? Once you're even decent at these games, you know a weapon or two, your concept of build making is solid enough, you know which items are for what, there will never be another hard low rank or even early to mid high rank again. Even if the game's always stayed the same and never added quality of life changes or whatever. And it's on purpose, to keep newcomers from just completely getting filtered. You're chasing a high from when you first played the game that you just can never have again. Not in low rank. Probably not till Arch-Tempered or maybe even Master Rank drops. You can decide for yourself whether you agree with Capcom's handling of the onboarding process or not, but that's the undeniable fact of the matter. The games are largely easier, both because you've gotten better and there's less friction placed on everything surrounding the combat. You can never go back to that feeling of hardship that you remember so fondly, because it wasn't you struggling to beat the enemy. You were struggling to learn the game, your weapon, remember every item, not run out of whetstones, how to control the character and camera if you go back far enough. And no matter what new enemy or system is put in front of you, there's nothing they can make it do that will make you unlearn the fundamentals of the game that you have internalized. By the way, quick side note on that. I know there's some people that are all about the way the old games were difficult. And I get it. Low rank in Monster Hunter on the PS2 certainly was way harder than low rank in Wilds or World, or probably any of the other games. But I want to repeat myself that this isn't for reasons that would translate well in modern gaming. Trust me, I absolutely adore the way that Demon Souls and Dark Souls were hard. And I think it's pretty similar to the way that the old gen Monster Hunter games were hard. Slow, deliberate combat pacing that wasn't so much skill expressive as it was knowledge and patience testing. Extremely punishing stakes with super finite healing items, whetstones, etc. I get it, I really do. But these games were designed to be challenging in a time where tech limited the amount they could do with the actual combat, and thus the framework the devs were working in was just different. Even though I love games like that, I'm the first to be critical of the fact that they weren't really hard because the enemies were hard. They were hard because the games were so incredibly restrictive of what you could do, and they would obscure their demands of you. You had to figure it out. It was methodical and cerebral and different from modern action games like Wilds or Elden Ring. It was great, truly. But these old games still exist if that's what you want to play. I don't think it's a valid criticism of an artist's work or new works to simply say that they should be more like the old works. Artists and media are ever evolving, and we as the audience of said art should be seeking to keep up with and understand the movements and directions of the artists we enjoy, rather than always and only looking backwards longingly. Okay. Now I just want to address a couple of talking points that I hear floating around often and toss my 2 cents at you. So, a pretty easily dismissible complaint or claim about something making the game too easy is the misconception that monsters do substantially less damage to the player in Wilds compared to the other new-gen titles. While it is numerically true that the monsters deal marginally less damage in Wilds, both World and Rise had means of drastically exceeding the 150 HP cap. In World, you could get up to 200 total HP with Health Boost 3, and Rise, I'm pretty sure you could get even more than that with Spirit Birds, but don't quote me on that. I haven't really put a ton of time into Rise yet. Point being, though, Wilds is balanced around the hard 150 HP cap. So the monsters hit proportionally less hard compared to a game that allows you to access much higher health thresholds. It effectively ends up being quite similar damage though. So I think that one's put to bed, but if you don't believe me, you can check out Monster Hunter Meatman's channel. I'll link it below. He does lots of interesting tests and great commentary on this sort of thing. He made an incredible 4-hour-long video on Wild's difficulty that inspired and informed this video a good bit. So shout out to the Meat Man. I'm a certified meat lover. Seems like a genuine chiller and a well thought out individual. Go show him the love he deserves. Oh, and anecdotally, I feel like Tempered Arkveld's Dragon Charge chain attacks, and especially Tempered Gormagala in general, hit a good bit harder than anything I recall from base World's high rank. Just food for thought. Haven't tested that. Let me know if anyone's run the numbers on that, or if you'd be willing to. So, Seikret pickup. Seikret in general, actually. Some people are pressed about this damn bird. I'ma just say it once though. Speeding up traversal does not make the game easier in any meaningful way, just more convenient. The pickup, though, it's Wirefall all over again, huh? You got knocked down, big follow-ups coming your way. Call the Seikret, he'll pick you right up and bring you to safety, right? Get out of jail free. Well, sometimes I guess, but let me say it clear for the people with earplugs 3 slotted. Seikret pickup is not nearly as consistent or safe as just lying on the fucking ground in your iframes and waiting to see what's gonna happen. Which, by the way, I think you've been able to do that since like 4th gen. That's what I remember, and the Google AI overview seems to agree, so check me on that if I'm wrong, but either way, the safest option imaginable of all time has been around for a good amount of time, and the supposed get out of jail free card that is Seikret pickup has gotten me slammed probably 3 or 4 times out of 10. I just basically don't even use it anymore. It has its situational uses for sure when you know there's no follow-up coming, but it just isn't consistent or safe at all. And that's against the base game monsters. I am positive that with title updates and the eventual expansion, there will be plenty of monsters with moves specifically designed to track and punish the panic whistle for your Seikret. We saw this in Rise Break when suddenly Wirefall was getting you clapped in the late and endgame content. And we're already seeing this mechanic having some pretty serious risk-reward implications in base wilds. Seikret's strong for sure, it's very strong. And we'll get to its other implications in a second, but I really want to drive my point home that the pickup is not safe. There are so many variables, including the Seikret's distance from you, which direction it's coming from to pick you up, if it gets stuck on the monster or a rock or twig or a small monster or whatever, and probably other things I'm not considering. The moral of the story is if you really play the game a fair amount, you should know that the Seikret pickup is actually a way riskier maneuver to kind of instantly queue up than simply staying put in the laydown iframes and see what the monster is going to do next, and just responding accordingly. Seikret is a tool with a pretty hefty risk associated with it while in combat, and for some time we've had a more consistent tool accessible that is safer and just easier to do. You don't even have to press any buttons. You just lay there. So don't sleep on just laying on the ground. And Seikret is not, Seikret pickup specifically is not overpowered. As for the other utility of the Seikret, some people don't like that it's easier to stay safe while sharpening, I guess. Because you can like hop on the bird mid-fight and just sharpen and then jump back on the monster. I do agree that this feels kind of silly and maybe a little immersion breaking in some kind of hard to place way, but it's not really functionally any different in terms of the objective difficulty of execution than just like running away and sharpening somewhere safe like you would before we had mounts. It just kind of saves a little time and makes it more convenient to stay actively involved in the fight. It isn't really making anything easier, especially when even before Seikret, it's been super commonplace to run Handicraft or Master's Touch or Speed Sharpening to kind of minimize your downtime in fights anyway, and you can still do this. I pretty much always run a Razor Sharp / Handicraft Jewel in the tier 3 slot on any weapon I run. And if I don't, I'm running either Master's Touch on a crit build or Speed Sharpening. All of which are much easier, quicker, safer, and more convenient than calling the Seikret and running in circles around the monster while you're sharpening. Just saying. It doesn't really change anything substantial about the game, other than being able to top up sharpness when the monster runs away and you have to chase it. Like, it's just straight quality of life. Nothing to get pressed about, in my opinion. Now, before we get to the big one that I actually think warrants some real consideration and discussion, another thing I want to quick state my opinion on is the removal of certain so-called hunting simulation mechanics. And by this, I believe most people are referring to the world-style tracking mechanics. You know, like picking up some claw marks or hair or a piece of shit off of the ground so your scout flies could gradually lead you to the monster's location. Or maybe you could consider wandering around before you find and eventually like paintballing your target in old gen to kind of be the precursor. to this? Well, I thought this was pretty cool and immersive in world, and I did enjoy some emphasis on some of the strict preparation and resource management expectations set for the player in old gen. I don't think Wilds suffers a ton as a Monster Hunter title from streamlining the process of preparing to hunt and getting to your mark. More importantly, anyone claiming that this was done to make the game somehow easier is conflating pacing and difficulty, which is a common through line with the arguments I'm critiquing in this video. Gradually tracking down a target on foot in World, for example, had no effect on the difficulty of the game. It just made it take longer to find your target. Having to sit still and sharpen before walking to your target each time it runs away was not a hard thing to do. It was just slower paced. I'd even argue that the faster pace in Wilds means there's potentially more going on in your mental stack at any given moment. Not that you have to go faster, and not that it's substantially difficult to do so or anything like that. Just a counterpoint of a similar scope and scale. And I can see the angle that this is somehow casualizing Monster Hunter, but I just don't know if I can agree. And I think this discourse is comparable to old Souls heads disliking fast travel becoming a staple mechanic in the newer games, or again, the faster and more fluid combat system evolutions. Sure, it can be called less subjectively immersive this way, but nothing's free, and I think the quality of life gains are a proportionate and fair trade-off that the developers have decided to make. Again, I get the super old gen perspective that in the earliest games, the hunt timer was a real consideration, and trying to find the monster, make sure your paintball was still active by the time it moved, was an important use of your valuable time and resources, and that this did add pressure to the hunting simulation aspect of the game and thus increased the perceived difficulty. But I just think Monster Hunter has been so far removed from that for so long now that it's just kind of apples and oranges again. We're talking about Wilds versus old gen mechanics, particularly when we're talking about these hunting simulation mechanics. I just don't think there's much of an argument to make here. Now, let's get to the really substantial pain point that's actually negatively affecting the difficulty and gameplay dynamic in base Wilds. Focus mode and wounds. These gameplay changes have drastically changed the implementation of combat in a way that further incentivizes player aggression, greatly increases the player's control over their hunter, and arguably de-emphasizes strategic positioning and caution to some degree when compared to older games in the series. Going through these elements one by one, Focus mode allows the player a previously unattainable level of precision, flexibility, and control over their attacks, allowing for mid-swing adjustments that were not even remotely possible prior to focus mode. This is a double-edged sword. I think this mechanic feels really good, modern, and fluid. It suits the faster, action-emphasizing style of Wilds, and has a lot of potential to be further iterated on as a way to continue to allow players greater autonomy and control in combat. However, I feel there's two problems with the implementation of focus mode in Wilds. The first is quite obvious and quite simple to identify and remedy, and that's just that the level of swing correction you can perform is sometimes just very, very overtuned. In my opinion, there needs to be some sort of hard turn limit after a certain point in certain animations, kind of like Chivalry 2's swing manipulation system. I should not be able to 360 spirit round slash, or pivot my greatsword TCS 180 degrees when I would have otherwise whiffed completely. While these things do a lot to help you look cool, they diminish the importance of commitment and positioning in a way that feels decidedly un-Monster Hunter to me. While I like the fluid range of adjustment for most normal attack strings, counters, etc., like being able to reverse backstep a foresight slash, or the range of motion in Sword and Shield's attack strings, they make the weapon feel insanely mobile and versatile like it should. But I think the really big burst moves and combo finishers should have a more restrictive turn radius to keep them feeling weighty and gratifying and like the important, memorable, high-stakes make-or-break moments that they used to be. And the other problem with focus mode is not even really a problem with focus mode at all. The problem is that these monsters in base wilds are just not really yet up to snuff when it comes to compensating for how precise and mobile the hunter now is. I think Zhu Wu is a good example of a monster who tries to do this. Ebony Odogaron as well. Odogaron, whatever. Doggy. They juke, they squirm. They're moving, they're schmoving, and they can be genuinely kind of tough to keep up with. Zhu Wu especially can kind of break your camera on you, and I think that if the focus system is going to remain in the state it's currently in, Wilds is going to need to push that further and rely on elusive and high mobility monster design to keep the player on their toes and keep the fights feeling engaging and rewarding. Which brings me to the secondary but equally, if not more important, feature of focus mode: the new wound system and focus strikes. Not gonna sugarcoat it. The wounds pop up way too frequently and easily. That's the problem. That's it. Having guaranteed flinches and, in a lot of cases, topples, as well as a chunk of burst damage at the press of one button that costs no resources and is generally a pretty low commitment animation on most weapons, is obviously really fucking strong. Not to mention the fact that a lot of weapons get other benefits from performing focus strikes, like longsword leveling up its meter, power axe mode, that sort of thing. Don't get it twisted though, I actually love the premise of wounds. I think it's an elegant evolution of World's underwhelming tenderizing system that was just not executed in a particularly fun or gratifying way. In fact, it kind of sucked. It's a great general premise though, and I think they just really need to dial up the wound resistance on any future endgame monsters that are going to be added to the game. I'm hopeful that the arch-tempered tier monsters will be far more resistant, if not completely immune to normal wounds, and maybe instead they will have an even more impactful variant of tempered wounds that you really have to work to open up, but will offer a greatly rewarding burst of damage and opening if you can manage to pop one. I think a ton of depth can be squeezed out of the wound system, maximizing DPS on them before popping them, lining up your focus strike to pop multiple wounds at once for increased damage modifiers on each successive wound pop, using them to min-max red gauge uptime on longsword, tactically picking off one at a time to maximize time that the monster spends CC'd. This is all interesting and fun, in theory. I love the amount of options and autonomy this, in theory, gives the player. I like the gameplay loop. That being said, much like the focus system at large, I think it just released in a severely overtuned state, and there's little reason to actually think about how you're managing the system, because it's just too consistently accessible and rewarding, rendering that autonomy and decision-making and management irrelevant. It's just press the button whenever and often online play can devolve into a race for wound pops as players compete for weapon resources like meter and dopamine. And it's kind of sad how poor the implementation of this great idea is, to be honest. I'm really hoping that the title updates and eventual expansion will see the ease of access to wounds addressed and really bring out the highest potential of this system. Because right now it's just not there yet. Hey, just wanted to throw this in here. While I was writing this, Arch-Tempered Raydao has released, and he does seem much more resistant to wounds. I'll probably splice in a couple notes about him where it's relevant as the script continues. But the long short of it is, as far as I can tell with my limited time spent fighting him so far, he remedies a lot of the difficulty issues of Wilds and really takes the combat to a place that I know it can go and that it should go. AT Raydao is a super exciting development, and I am having a ton of fun with him. Alright, back on script. Another similarly great idea that is simply overtuned in the base game is the amount of environmental hazards that the player can abuse to trap, damage, and otherwise CC the monster. I appreciate this a lot and think that in moment-to-moment gameplay, it is super fun to be attentive to and taking advantage of each scenario as the hunt unfolds. However, I think if we're going to be able to CC and trap the monster so frequently, as well as dealing big free environmental damage in the process, the monsters really need to have more HP to compensate and stay down for less time when they are toppled. That's it. I don't think it's a design problem in terms of the environment. I actually think it's a great dynamic feature to the gameplay, and it adds a lot. I just think that it's disproportionately rewarding and can significantly shorten hunts in a way that's a little underwhelming. I'd rather have the game be balanced around the expectation that you will be using the environment to the fullest to make that damage and CC feel more earned and important to take advantage of, rather than just kind of being free icing on the cake. All of the very free feeling offensive options can lead to a very snowballing feel, a one-sided dynamic and rhythm to the hunts. And it can feel like once the ball gets rolling for you, it's pretty much over. There are a few cases such as Tempered Arkveld, Tempered Gormagala, and now especially AT Raydao, where this feels more evenly weighted, or even weighted in the monster's favor a little bit, where they have equal or greater opportunity to snowball the fight their way as you do yours. When it's balanced out right, I actually like this dynamic a lot, and it leads to opportunities to either party to kind of assert dominance or to make a strong comeback, and it still keeps you on your toes to maintain your lead when you've got it. Again, when it's working right. Now, all of these elements combined with the weapons being at least marginally easier to learn and play, but maybe harder to master to the fullest than ever before, has led us to a precipice. Wild's combat has the ultimate potential to be the greatest we've ever seen in the series, assuming that the developers can iterate on it in robust and fully fleshed out ways. Arch-Tempered Raydao leads me to believe they're aware of the heights players can reach with this combat system, and that they're more than willing to bring their A-game when it comes to matching our freak with high-quality, challenging hunts in the future. So at this point in the video, I was going to include an excerpt of a video by M.H. Swoosser, kind of critiquing Wilds, but ultimately he was pretty positive in his outlook for the future of the game, as I am. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. I assume I am, but I don't feel like fixing it if this video gets copyrighted or anything. So I'll just summarize what he says. Basically, he's like, yo, Rise hunters were the strongest hunters yet. I think Rise hunters are maybe still stronger than Wilds hunters, but they're comparable. And he just points to the endgame content of Rise being completely like batshit insane. I haven't played that deep into Rise, so that's why I'm kind of crediting him. I didn't want to, take his ideas without giving him props, because I haven't played Rise, but I find it encouraging that other more knowledgeable people than me, other veterans that are perhaps more invested even, can kind of see the future of this game shaping up that way. So, editor section over. Back on script, baby. Link in the description, obviously, to that video and his channel. But a game that makes you more powerful has room to make its foes more powerful. And I have faith in these developers to execute on this premise to the fullest. Wild's combat is such an exciting prospect that I'm more than willing to look past the overtuned state of base Wilds, because I'm so sincerely looking forward to the future of this game. Now that about wraps up the difficulty section. Just want to say one more time, I have faith that Capcom is indeed cooking with Wilds and its new systems, despite the questionable state of things at launch. I think there's hope for Wilds to be the highest octane and most insane Monster Hunter game to date, potentially even one-upping Rise in this regard, and I am just very excited to see where they decide to take it. Speaking of where the devs decide to take it, I want to talk a little bit about direction. As a long-time and active member of the Souls community, I'm no stranger to really any of the rhetoric I see in the Monster Hunter new game discourse. I'm no stranger to seeing old heads glazing the first game as if it wasn't just a janky mess with some special mojo that they can't take off the rose-tinted glasses to look at with a level head. I'm actually one of these guys. Demon's Souls is a near-perfect experience, don't at me. And I'm no stranger to the new game is far too casual and the normies killed it and the devs have lost their way and no longer make extreme games for extreme gamers. I'm no stranger to people turning around and glazing that very same game as soon as the new game comes out, even though they were just given the aforementioned game the new game treatment. I'm no stranger to people relatively new to the series thinking the new game that they played first is the best thing since sliced bread, and any new game after that should just be a carbon copy of the game they started with. None of this is new to me, or really that unique to Monster Hunter or FromSoft. Probably happens in every community based around an ongoing and evolving series. And you know what it sounds like? Sounds like people need to get a grip and let them cook. And now I'm not saying to blindly praise every new choice a developer makes, or not to voice concerns. I'm saying that we should think critically about whether we would really have the same love and passion for these IPs if they had just stayed the same. If Elden Ring played exactly like Demon's Souls, none of the systems were adapted or reiterated on, but they were just copied and pasted, would we really hold FromSoft in such high regard? And would Demon's Souls really still feel so special? If Monster Hunter wasn't a series that never shied away from experimentation and zaniness, and never stayed the same, for better or worse, would it really have the same magic and whimsy every time a new game gets announced? The new game is a new game for a reason. These developers are inspired people, artists. We love and respect these IPs for being distinctly different from the money printer video games that release essentially a title update with a full game price tag on a yearly basis. The people making Monster Hunter at Capcom, the people making Souls and Souls adjacent games at FromSoft, they want to bring us those fresh and exciting experiences just like they did that first time when you fell in love with your favorite game. And if we can't be open-minded towards them and their direction, then I don't know if we can say we deserve that. And I can say for sure you'll never fall in love with the new game. A game will never be perfect, and critique is valid and important. There's always room to improve. But I find it hard to believe that that's the ethos behind all the old game was better arguments I see online. You have to look at a new game for what it is and what it wants to be, and critique that. Let go of your old gen anxiety, because the old games are still there, buddy. You can just go play them anytime you want. But the new game is only new once, and the next new game will change it all again. We should try harder to be there for that, and discuss it in good faith with level heads. That's about all, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for sticking with me for a long one today. I'm Big Charles. You're pressing subscribe. Leave a comment for me, big dog. God bless, Monster Hunter. And I will see you in the next one. Later, y'all.